the same shore. Chapter 1. The Window Seat. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a nursing home in the hour before dinner. Not peacefully, exactly, more like a breath held too long. I have lived at Ashgrove for 2 years and 4 months. I know this because Finn, my son, who visits on alternating Sundays and looks at his phone more than he looks at me, told me on the day I arrived that it was a temporary arrangement just until my hip healed properly, and I have been counting the months since then. The way a man counts money he knows he will never see again. My name is Matteo. I am 81 years old. I was a civil engineer. I built bridges, which is either the most ironic profession for a man of my temperament or the most honest one, depending on your view. The window seat in the common room is mine. Not officially. There is nothing official about it, but I have sat there every morning since October of my first year, and no one has contested it, which in a place like Ashgrove constitutes something close to a deed of ownership. From it, I can see the car park, the strip of brown garden beyond the low wall, and in winter, when the oak loses its leaves, a sliver of the canal. It was from this window seat that I first noticed Soren. He arrived on a Thursday. I remember because Thursday is when they change the flowers in the entrance hall, and I had watched the young woman with the red hair, Selena, one of the day staff, carry out the old arrangement, a sad clutch of yellow chrysanthemums that had been dying politely for a week. The new flowers were white. I did not register what kind. I was watching the door. A man came through it, tall, even now, with the kind of height that doesn't stoop so much as negotiate with itself. White hair cut close, a canvas bag in one hand. He was perhaps 83 or 84, though I am not reliable with ages. He stood in the entrance hall for a moment, not looking around with the bewildered expression most people wear when they first arrive. That particular look of a person realizing their life has taken a turn. They cannot reverse, but instead, with something closer to assessment, as if he were cataloging the place, noting exits. I turned back to my window. That afternoon, a care worker named Leo introduced him at the dinner table. Soren, originally from Denmark, now British for 50 years. A retired academic, it seemed something in history. He ate quietly, spoke when spoken to, and at one point corrected something. The woman across from him said about the Falklands War with a precision that was not unkind, but left no room for disagreement. I did not think about him again until the following Saturday, when I overheard him in the corridor. He was on the telephone. His voice was low, but the walls at Ashgrove are not thick, and I had stopped at the notice board. I stopped there sometimes, not because the notices interested me, but because standing still in a corridor feels less conspicuous than standing still in a room. And I heard him say in Danish, a sentence I understood only because I worked in Copenhagen for 3 years in my 50s. Det var ikke din skyld. It was not your fault. A pause. Then age. Heller ikke min. No. Nor mine. He ended the call. I moved away before he emerged. Chapter 2. What the war means to an old man. The hostility did not begin immediately. These things rarely do. They accrete. It started at the dinner table about 3 weeks after Soren's arrival. Someone, I think it was Anton, a former lorry driver with a loud laugh and no malice in him at all, mentioned the Gulf War. Soren said something measured and considered about the politics of intervention, and I said something less measured, and Anton looked between us the way a man does when he realizes he has inadvertently opened a door to a room he did not intend to enter. The specific argument doesn't matter now. They never do, in retrospect. What matters is the shape of it. Two old men who had each lived through enough history to have calcified around their own versions of it, meeting at the edges. Soren believed certain things about duty and the cost of inaction. I believed certain things about the cost of action that is dressed up as duty. Neither of us was entirely wrong. Neither of us was entirely right. But we were both, I understand now, arguing about something else entirely. After that dinner, a distance established itself between us that felt almost formal. We did not ignore each other. We were too old and too confined for anything so dramatic. We occupied the same spaces. We were civil when required. We participated in the same activities: the Tuesday film screenings, the Wednesday quiz, the slow and melancholy business of watching television after supper. But there was a quality to our proximity that I can only describe as charged. The way the air feels before a storm that never quite arrives. Selena, who missed very little, despite appearing to miss everything, said to me once, very quietly, while handing me my evening tablets, "You two have the same posture, you know. When you're angry." I told her I wasn't angry. She gave me the look young women give to old men who are lying. What I will not do, even now, is pretend the animosity was only ideological. That would be too clean. There was something in Soren that irritated me, in the particular way that only a mirror can irritate. Not the reflection you see, but the one you suspect is there beneath it. He was precise where I was imprecise. He held his opinions with a steadiness that I sometimes read as arrogance, and sometimes, in my more honest moments, as discipline. I had never quite managed. He read a great deal. He did not complain about his food. He sent handwritten letters, which I know because I saw them waiting by the post tray. Actual letters, on actual paper, in handwriting so careful. It looked deliberate. I told myself I disliked him because of his politics. This was not entirely untrue. There was a morning in January, gray, damp, the canal invisible behind low cloud, when I arrived at my window seat to find Soren already there, sitting in my chair, not because he had taken it deliberately, but because he had simply not known. I stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked up, saw my expression, and without a word, moved to the adjacent chair. He did not apologize. Neither did I. We sat in silence for perhaps 20 minutes, both looking at the car park before Selina brought us tea. Neither of us had asked for. She set down the cups without comment and left, and Soren wrapped both hands around his mug and said to the window, rather than to me, "The oak will have its leaves back by March." "April," I said. He considered this. "You may be right." That was all, but I remembered it, which is perhaps the point. Chapter 3. A photograph in the common room. It was Selina who found the photograph, though she did not know what she had found. She had organized a small exhibition for the common room, a project she had proposed to the management and been allowed to carry out, a wall of pictures contributed by residents. Old photographs, places, people, the evidence of lives lived before Ashgrove. She called it, with the cheerful literalism of someone who has not yet learned to distrust that impulse, our stories. Most of the photographs were what you would expect: weddings, children on beaches, men in uniform, women in hats that no longer exist. I contributed one of myself on the Öresund Bridge, not mine, but one I had worked adjacent to early in the project. Standing in a hard hat, looking younger than I can now quite believe I ever was. Soren contributed nothing for the first week. Then one morning, there appeared on the wall, pinned with the same deliberate care he brought to everything, a single photograph in black and white. It was taken on a cliff top, somewhere coastal. The light had that particular flatness that belongs to the North Sea, rather than the Atlantic. A woman stood at the edge of the frame, three-quarter profile, looking out at something beyond the image's reach. She wore a light coat. Her hair was dark and cut short. She was, I judged from the quality of the photograph and the style of the coat, somewhere in her late 20s. The photograph was undated. I stood in front of it for what must have been a long time, because when I finally became aware of my surroundings again, Selina was beside me, tidying the arrangement of another photograph. And she said, without looking at me, "Beautiful, isn't it? Do you know who she is?" "No," I said. This was not entirely true. I did not know her name. That is true. I had never known her name, or rather, I had known it once, had been told it, twice at a party in Edinburgh in the autumn of 1968, and had lost it in the subsequent years, the way you lose things you did not know you needed. But the face, the way she stood, with her weight slightly forward, as though she were perpetually on the verge of walking towards something that I knew. I had known it for 57 years. She had been at that party, a large, loud affair in a tall house near the meadows. The kind of gathering that existed in the late 60s, with a kind of organized chaos that I have not seen since. I was 24. I had just begun my first real job, a junior position with a firm working on a project in the borders. A friend of a friend had invited me. I had drunk too much wine and stood near the window already. Even then, I sought out windows, and she had appeared beside me and said something about the view, which was not much of a view, just the dark street below. But she said it as though the street were worth looking at, and I had agreed, and we had talked. For how long? I cannot say. Long enough. About everything and nothing in the way of conversations that matter before you understand. They are going to matter. I did not see her again. I had never been able to explain even to myself why not. The party had moved and separated the way parties do, and by the time I looked for her again, she was gone. I asked the friend of a friend. He couldn't place her. I described her. He said there had been a lot of people there. He wasn't wrong. I carried it as one carries a small stone in one's pocket, not heavy, but present, always present. That night, I could not sleep. At 3 in the morning, I sat in the chair by my window and looked at the orange-lit car park and thought it is possible that Soren is just a man who once took a photograph. It is possible. Chapter 4. What we do not say at breakfast. The next morning, I sat down across from Soren at breakfast for the first time. He looked up from his toast. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise, more a careful reorganization of expectations. The exhibition, I said. The photograph you put up. He waited. The woman on the cliff. A pause, long enough to be significant. He set down his toast. What about her? I did not know precisely what I intended to say next. I said, I met her once, a long time ago, at a party in Edinburgh. The silence that followed was of a different quality than any silence we had previously shared. Soren looked at me with an expression I cannot fully describe. It was not hostile. It was not warm. It was something more complicated than either the look of a man who has just watched 2 rooms of his interior life knock unexpectedly into each other. When, he said, it wasn't quite a question. 1968 October, I think, near the meadows. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, somewhere, a car started. The morning light came through the dining room windows at the low autumn angle that makes everything look slightly provisional. Her name, he said finally, was Eva. Eva. I turned it over. It fit, in the way that names always seem to fit in retrospect, as if the person were waiting for you to learn it. She was 26, Soren said. She was studying marine biology. She had grown up in Fife. She was the cleverest person I had ever met, and she knew it, but not in a way that made it difficult to be around her. He paused. She died in 1987. Cancer. She was 45 years old. I absorbed this. I'm sorry, I said. Were you in love with her? He asked. The bluntness of it was not cruel. It was the question of a man who has passed the age at which circumlocution serves any purpose. I considered lying. I considered the various soft answers that were available to me. I only met her once. It was a long time ago. One doesn't really call it love. I thought about her for 57 years, I said. I don't know what else to call that. Soren looked at his toast. Then he looked at the window. Then he looked at me, and in his face, I saw something I had not expected to see. Not rivalry, not confirmation of our antagonism, but something quieter, something that looked, if I am not misreading it, like recognition. I was with her for 4 years, he said, 1969 to 1973. She left me, not because I had done something wrong, or at least not one definable thing. She said she felt like she was standing still and needed to move. He was quiet. I never entirely stopped hoping I would run into her, even after I married, even after she died, and I found out about it years later. He stopped. We sat for a long time without speaking. The breakfast trolley came and went. Anton ate eggs noisily at the far table and laughed at something Leo had said, and the ordinary morning continued around us, indifferent to whatever was happening in our corner of it. I didn't know her name, I finally said. I asked, but I forgot. The way you forget things you don't know you'll need. Soren nodded slowly. She was very easy to talk to. Yes. She looked at windows. Yes. He picked up his toast, put it down again. I put the photograph up, he said, because it seemed wrong for her to exist only in my memory. She deserved more witnesses. I did not answer. I was thinking of a party in Edinburgh in 1968, of a woman standing at a window with her weight forward of 57 years of a face I didn't have a name for. I was thinking of all the arguments Soren and I had had about wars and politics and the meaning of things, and how those arguments had felt necessary at the time, had felt like a way of being in the world, and how they felt now less like positions and more like armor that neither of us had known we were wearing. You should have her photograph, I said. He looked at me. It's for the exhibition. After the exhibition, he was quiet for a moment. There's no need. Yes, there is, I said. She deserves to be somewhere specific, not on a wall in a common room. He looked at me for a long time. Then he gave a small nod, not agreement exactly, but the acknowledgement that there was nothing useful left to dispute. Chapter 5. The Oak in April. Spring came, as springs do, with a tentative quality that I find more moving as I age, the way it offers itself, without guarantee, without insistence, as if it knows you might not be there to see the summer. The oak, for the record, got its leaves back in early April. Soren said nothing about this. Neither did I. but he glanced at me across the common room on the morning. I noticed it, and I looked back, and that was sufficient. Things between us did not transform. I want to be careful here because I am aware of the temptation to make this into a neater story than it is. We did not become friends the way younger people mean it. There were no late-night conversations, no confessions, no dramatic rehabilitation of our opinion of one another. We were too old for that, and we had been too set in our mutual dislike for too long. And some portion of the dislike was, I suspect, genuine on both sides. But something shifted in the quality of it. The charge went out of our silences. We no longer sat in the dining room on opposite sides, though we did not always seek each other out. We disagreed about politics with a frequency that had not diminished, but the disagreements had lost their edge. They had become almost habitual, almost, I am searching for the word, companionable. One afternoon in April, Soren brought a book to the window seat. He did not sit in my chair. He sat in the adjacent one, which had by now become tacitly his. He read, and I looked at the canal visible now, the water flat and silvery in the afternoon light. And after a while, he said, without looking up, "She would have found us both insufferable, you know." I considered this. Probably. She had very little patience for men who argued as a substitute for thinking. Did you argue a great deal with her? Constantly. He turned a page. She always won. I watched a heron land on the far bank of the canal and stand there with the absolute stillness of a creature that knows how to wait. She was very certain of things, I said, even when I barely knew her. She had opinions about the view. She always had opinions about the view. We were quiet for a while. The heron did not move. I thought of her often, I said. Too often for a woman I only met once. I used to feel guilty about it, as if it were indulgent. Perhaps it was, Soren said, but perhaps it was also just the way that some people stay with you. Not because you were in love with them necessarily, but because they showed you something. I thought about this. I thought about the party near the meadows, and the window, and the woman who had stood beside me and made an ordinary street seem worth looking at. I thought about the fact that I had spent 57 years carrying an unnamed face, and that the man sitting beside me had spent those same years carrying the name that went with it. And I thought, not for the first time, about the strange geometries of lives. The way two people can orbit the same point for decades and never know it, never touch, never become anything to each other, except the vague and distant shapes of men at opposite tables in a nursing home dining room. You asked me once, I said, if I was in love with her. Soren kept his eyes on his book. I don't think I was, I said. I think she was the nearest I got, in one conversation, to the sense that someone was looking at the same thing I was looking at. That's not love exactly, but it's not nothing. Soren was quiet for a long time. The heron lifted suddenly, without visible reason, and crossed the canal and disappeared behind the trees. "No," he said finally, "it's not nothing." He went back to his book. I went back to the canal. Outside, the oak held its April leaves with the tentative confidence of new things. Somewhere in the building, Leo was laughing again, and a door opened and closed, and the ordinary afternoon continued at its ordinary pace. The photograph was moved to Soren's room after the exhibition came down, as I had suggested. It stands, I understand, on his bedside table. I have not seen it there. He has not invited me into his room, and I have not asked to come in. This seems right. There are territories that belong to a man alone, and grief, even grief this old, this quiet, this thoroughly composted into the soil of a life, is one of them. But sometimes, in the morning, before the day staff arrive, and the breakfast trolley, and the noise of the ordinary world, I sit at my window, and I think of Eva, not with longing exactly, with something gentler and more settled, with the particular gratitude you feel for things that happened, even if they happened once, and briefly, and a very long time ago. And occasionally, across the common room, Soren will be in his chair, and I will be in mine, and we will both be looking at the same window, and neither of us will say a word. It is enough. At our age, it is more than enough.